David, like free play is so important. And unfortunately, we see free play environments in terms of where kids just self-organize into their own games, or even play just participating in a slightly more formalized thing like yours, but something I would still consider in the free play category.
Great. So welcome everyone to another episode of Basketball Nation Presents Beyond the Athlete. And today we have a special guest, Mr. Alex Sarama. I'll say Coach Alex Sarama, but he's more than a coach. He's all things basketball. He's actually a basketball genius. And we're very honored to have a conversation with him today and really learn from him. So stay tuned and keep your eyes and your ears peeled to this conversation. So welcome to the podcast, Alex. How are you doing today?
David, thanks so much for having me on. I appreciate that's probably the nicest introduction I've ever had to a podcast, but it's great to be here. I'm looking forward to talking through lots of different ideas.
Yes, definitely. So, Alex, it'd be great to know who you are. I only found out who you were first met at the London Lions under 15 select tryouts. Because I saw what you were doing with the young kids in terms of like the drills, and I was like, this is amazing. Like everyone's engaged, everyone's doing certain things. Like I brought a 13-year-old down, and he was like, oh, he's noticed where he needs to improve on and work on just from those drills. So where did everything start from? What was your take us as far back as you can remember?
Okay, great question. So I grew up in Guildford in Surrey, playing with the Guildford Heat program.
I remember Guildford Heat.
Yeah, and I just got into basketball when I started secondary school. So year 7, I'd never played basketball before, did it at school, and I just loved it. You know, it was in the school club. And I'd always grown up prior to that playing football. So I just loved basketball. I went to a game the Guildford Heat were playing. They're obviously the best team in the BBL at the time, and I was just straight away. So that kind of started everything for me. Then when as I got older and I was going into year 10 at school, so I was still young, I got very into coaching, and I started running. That's one of the best things about the UK at the time. There were opportunities to coach which wouldn't have been presented to me if I was in a more traditional basketball country. It's just the reality of how it was. So naturally what happened was I got loads of opportunities to coach, got really into the game. And then long story short, I started my own club when I was 16 years old. So starting my first year of sixth form. It was called the Guildford Goalhawks. And eventually we did national leagues. We actually won this isn't, something that I wanted to be remembered for, but we actually won the national championship with the girls U14s for 1 year. So, we had some good players, a lot of players playing for England, blah, blah, blah. At that time, I'd say the approach I used to coaching was traditional. It was what I had grown up with. It was all I knew. And what I mean by traditional was a focus on using drills, techniques, on-air practices, like 1-on-0, 3-on-0, 5-on-0. But that's all I knew at the time. So long story short, I kept running the club. I studied history at the University of Nottingham. So I was kind of coming back home every weekend. And when I was 21, I started a position with the NBA. It started as an internship in the London office in basketball operations. And it was obviously a really cool opportunity to combine coaching and being on the court with operations and administration, event planning, all of that. So it was an incredible opportunity, got to really kind of travel, obviously develop NBA connections. But as I was doing that, David, I started becoming very passionate about actually learning more about the science of coaching. And I didn't realize that there was actually science that could be used to inform coaching and other organizational approaches in basketball, whether that's strength and conditioning, mental skills, nutrition. So I discovered this whole field called skill acquisition. And this is a field done looking at how athletes in any sport can become more skillful. And all that happened was I started just consuming all the research papers, trying to get as much as I could. And I
Yeah.
realized that the whole basketball world was based on a flawed theory in terms of coaches and entire organizations, even in the NBA in the present
Yeah.
day,
Yeah.
have no clue as to what skill is.
Yeah.
And they confuse skill for being techniques and patterns.
Hmm.
So that's kind of what began my whole journey with applying evidence-based approaches to basketball. And this is kind of what I'm known for now in the present day,
Yeah.
primarily, of course, in coaching, because I am a coach first and foremost,
Yeah.
but through looking at how these ideas based on science can inform the whole approaches of entire organizations at any level from youth to senior. That is basically what you saw in London with the Lions. We had 160 kids, which was obviously insane. But like you said, every kid was engaged. And the reason why was because we were using a methodology called the constraints-led approach. So instead of doing drills, we were designing small environments of the game. So there was defense in everything. And, players were having opportunities to make decisions and develop functional solutions as opposed to us coaches teaching them moves, etc.
And when you discovered this science of coaching, was it widely accepted, or did a lot of people think, like, what are you talking about? Basically, is this even real? Like, how? And after that, how did you take that? How did you overcome that as well?
Absolutely. So this is basically the premise of my life's mission and my life goal, to shift the paradigm in basketball and other sports, because I'm doing quite a lot of work in other sports now.
Okay, yeah. And we'll talk about that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. But mostly in basketball, because obviously this is the sport, I'm passionate about. And that's my life's work. When I first started exploring these ideas, I didn't have kind of the evidence base behind me. So I believed the fundamentals and things were irrelevant from quite an early age, but I couldn't articulate that. So I remember a lot of NBA dinners with colleagues who I absolutely loved, but we had very different approaches, and that was great because it actually it gave me the motivation to go away and really study this stuff. So as opposed to just providing an opinion, which is all I could do before, now I have the science and the evidence to back it up. And that's a huge difference, David, because the traditional approach to coaching and basketball is all based on opinions and trends and fads of the industry, whereas everything I'm giving is not my opinion, it's real evidence. So that obviously is a huge difference. So over the years, I've been sharing more and more, and I'd say it's certainly becoming more and more widespread. So for instance, last year I had the amazing opportunity to work with Coach Will Weaver at Paris Basketball, who I consider as being one of the most progressive professional coaches at any level of basketball. So Will will be back in the NBA next season. But had obviously a great chance to apply these ideas in context in Paris. And this is the reason why over the last 3 years I've been coaching in Italy. So I made a very kind of intentional focus. Instead of doing other jobs or going into like a professional scenario earlier, I decided to do Italy because it gave me full control over the whole ecosystem. So I wanted to show how my ideas eclipsed just coaching, but everything: basketball, player development, principles of play, strength and conditioning, nutrition, culture, human development, all these different fields. So having my own prep academy and bringing players in, I basically could develop all my ideas. And I'd say the hardest thing, David, has been having these ideas for so long and people not understanding how deep it goes. And that's the nature of it. I feel like, especially for the last 2 years, I've been using these ideas for about 5 years now, but for the last 2 years, I feel like, I've become very well versed in doing this. And obviously I'm constantly learning. And this is basically why I decided to write the book, which I'm working on now, called Transforming Basketball, because it's even people who know me well don't know how deep this stuff goes. And this is basically my way of outlining my ideas in a very clear rationale. I've become better through, undertaking this process. And I'm just really hoping that, this can lead to more momentum in the basketball world.
And through your journey from the beginning, like from when you discovered the science of coaching to the techniques and the drills that you've now, so I would say, mastered, and you teach, did you have any sort of guidance during that period of time as well that sort of kept you in line with like the consistency of progression, basically?
Absolutely. So I think I've always been interested in self-development, and I don't know why, it's some type of thing, whatever it could have been from my childhood, but I remember kind of reading books from like the age of 13 on things like growth mindset, and just evidence-based ideas kind of came to me quite naturally, and I was always very interested in them. So I actually had no mentor growing up. And
Wow. You're the second person on the podcast that's actually said that.
Yeah, that's it. And honestly, I think, David, that's the reason why I am who I am today. Because this is that's actually one of the reasons that the traditional approach is so prevalent. It's because having, more senior figures tell you how you must be coaching, it actually can bias you in a negative way, subject to obviously the influence that they have, whether they're using evidence-based processes or not. And obviously, because this approach is so new and no one, especially 5 years ago, like I think I'm really one of the first to do this in basketball. So, the mentors who do these things haven't existed. And that's why you see a lot of coach education courses based on traditional ideas. You see coaching clinics based on tradition, drills based on tradition. So all these things basically lead to a very powerful force field effect.
It's
path dependency, where more better ideas could exist, David, but people you feel that they must keep using the same approach even though a better alternative exists. So a coach called Mark Dunning was actually the first kind of coach who took an active interest in me. He's a UK coach. And Mark just gave me loads of resources and things like that, which really, really helped me figure out the direction I wanted to go in. But really, I learned from everyone. And, a lot of people in the basketball world don't necessarily share these ideas, but I find ways to apply it and take their ideas and kind of apply my concepts and my rationale to the things they're doing.
Okay, amazing. I was just checking my notes for a question that I made sure I had to ask as well. Do you believe that your techniques of what you've learned over the years can help excel the ecosystem of basketball in the UK right now? Because to the rest, us compared to the rest of the world, we're looking at countries like the USA, even parts of Africa as well. You're seeing is it South Sudan? Their team is quite strong at the moment. They're in the World Cup coming up as well. You look at teams like Serbia, who've always been strong. What is it that, first of all, is what you've learned over the years? Do you believe that can help push basketball in the UK further? And also, what else do you think is lacking in this space?
Yeah. So I love this question, and this is something, David, I think I'd love to spend a lot of time on, if that's okay with you. And we can
of course,
take this in different directions.
And
also it's going to be the most relevant to the audience. So for me, I've always been passionate about UK basketball, and I actually feel somewhat sad that I've had no involvement over the last 8 years. And the London Lions event was basically the first thing I did. Now, Barcelona did invite me for a clinic, which I really appreciated, but that was when the Queen died. So, of course, it was cancelled. So that would have been my first opportunity to come back and share these ideas. So, outside of that, I've done nothing. And I think what I remember growing up is I think a lot of things are the same today in terms of other countries are very envious of some of the things we have in terms of the players we have available, the potential that they have. But, we see kind of a continuous theme arising where players don't fulfill the potential that they could have from a young age. And, obviously there are lots of potential reasons why this could be, but I really think that applying evidence-based ideas, most specifically in coaching, this could be the game changer that British basketball needs. So I think what we see a lot of basketball world is copy and paste. And something I remember growing up is people were saying, okay, why don't we go and recruit 5 coaches from Serbia and bring them to the UK? But the problem is copy and paste doesn't work, because
Exactly. Yeah.
every single scenario is highly complex and different. Kids in the UK behave differently to Serbian kids. There are different constraints in terms of how the school system works, the competition system, professional league. So what we have to do is take evidence-based ideas, but apply them into the UK in a way that works. And this obviously requires people who have taken time to learn the UK landscape, learn about UK players. So for me, David, I think everything would begin with applying the constraints-led approach. So this would be coaches, instead of doing drills and instead of doing teaching techniques, it would be using small-sided games. So effectively designing small parts of the game, whether that's 1-on-1, 2-on-1, 2-on-2, 3-on-3s, and manipulating constraints within these. So for instance, okay, if you score at the rim, it's worth 5 points instead of 2. So what is that going to do? Well, players are going to self-organize, and they're going to find different solutions to get to the rim and finish without being told by the coach. So the whole problem with teaching players techniques is that we assume that every player is the same, and we assume the same fundamental will work in a complex environment of basketball. The reality is every player is very different. They have a completely different anatomy, different bones, ligaments, joint sizes, different heights, wingspans. So this is why players will self-organize into different movements based on what fits them the most. So that means that as coaches, we can design these environments where players are constantly making decisions, but then self-organizing into functional movements to solve the problems that they encounter. And if UK coaches could start doing this as opposed to doing things like 1-on-0, 3-man weave, and it's the same everywhere. It's not just but especially in England, I think this could offer an unparalleled competitive advantage. And I know, a lot of, as I've been sharing these ideas over the last 5 years, I've had the great chance to do numerous coaching clinics, speak with a lot of coaches. And I think that people are interested in this, but I think there's just a confusion in terms of how to apply these ideas. And then a lot of coaches think it's just about playing games, which it's not. So I actually did, for the London Lions, David, I did a series of coach development sessions, which are online, where I really went into the nitty-gritty and the details of what this approach entails. I think that's a great starting point. They're completely free, so coaches can access those. And, I shared loads of practical ideas as to how this manifests in a practice, in how maybe an under-12 team runs their offense, etc.
And where do you think, this is still a UK question as well, where do you think basketball needs to be heavily concentrated right now? And my question is based on age group, which generation? Every generation is important, from men's league to under 19s to under 21s. But from what you've seen so far, where do you think basketball should be really concentrated on the most right now, and how?
Yeah, great question. So firstly, I'm very excited by the work of the BBL and 777, because I think that is obviously changing the narrative. So I think for me, the main investment would be in coaching and youth development. I think that's the way, everything they're doing, it's so necessary, the steps they've taken. And I know that, when it really comes time to focus on the youth development, I think all the great things that have been implemented already will naturally just lead to even more momentum taking place. But when it comes to youth development, I would focus on evidence-based approaches. And this starts with the idea of as many as possible, as long as possible. So, I've had a lot of conversations with football academies and teams of us. I've done some consulting there. And, what we've traditionally seen in the Premier League is a lack of evidence-based approaches over the years. And we've seen kids being signed from really young ages. And it's been termed the race to the bottom. And, now more organizations are introducing more evidence-based ideas, simply because it shows that methods in the past have not worked and have not been successful. So I would start on the rationale of getting as many kids playing as possible and focusing enormously on participation. I think the Barcelona do a good job of this. So it's trying to keep as many kids engaged in basketball as possible. But naturally, now it comes to how we coaching kids. And I think this is where if we use a constraints-led approach instead of doing drills, naturally kids are going to be more retained in basketball. Why? They're going to have way more fun. So as opposed to laps, lines, and lectures, which we see in traditional coaching schemes, kids are playing the whole time. What approach is going to be more fun? You know, obviously the so as this happens, not only are kids having more fun, but they're going to become more skillful. And I think this has been one of the kind of the biggest problems in UK basketball. And people have spoken about these things like shooting ability, you know, especially in the youth now, hasn't been there.
Very huge.
So in terms of learning the game and learning about how to play, making, you know, consistently great decisions, well, obviously the CL achieves this. So what happens? Well, we're going to have way more skilled kids. Naturally, the whole ecosystem improves. The BBL becomes way better because the domestic players are so superior to what we've had in the past. So it's a very, you know, it's small steps which could lead to huge changes. And obviously what this requires is investing in coaching development. And this is where it's not easy because sports as a whole have a habit of putting people in charge who don't always necessarily understand what evidence-based ideas are. So it just leads a continuation of traditional ideas. And this is in federations all over the world. So this means, you know, England could pioneer a completely different coaching approach based on the ideas I advocate for. And I think, you know, this could really, really change the whole narrative of British basketball for the better.
Okay, that's amazing. And it's quite interesting because I know I haven't spoken much about what we do. So we actually started out, Basketball Nation started out, we all started running scrimmages every week, every Saturday. And we started it for 16+-year-olds. We do get, like, for example, my young guy, Josh, who's 13, but 6'4". So we have him come down and play with the older guys as well. Another 13-year-old, he's about 5'8", point guard. And another 14-year-old who's 6'7". So those three amongst the other guys come down and play. I think when we started off with about 25 people, and then that grew to crazy numbers. There's times where we had like 10 people come, like that came down, but then we just kept going, and then just started growing to like sometimes we'll get 70 people, 80 people, because we don't charge. We actually run it for free for 3 hours. But we had to, it wasn't feasible to have 80 people there based on risk and all that kind of stuff. So we had to reduce that down to 45 to 50. And we came up with a structure that would bring value to the players so that they're not just coming just to do a regular scrimmage. Basically, they just come, have a scrimmage, go home. So what we started to do is create a system where if we had 45 people, there's 8 teams, and for the first hour and a half, would do a structure of like a league structure. So you play, if you win 3 games straight, you come off, and then the next 2 teams come on, basically. So everyone was guaranteed to play at least 1 game against each other. So that means everyone's guaranteed to play 8 games. And then after that, we'll go on to who has the most wins after the hour and a half, and then go into sort of like the top 6 would play like a playoff game with and that playoff game would be 2 to 3 series depending on how much time we have. The other 2 teams would then now be subs for the other teams as well, so we don't exclude them at all. So they'll be subs for the other teams, and then once that's done, we'll have the finals. So the finals will actually showcase that on Instagram Live, which would be like the last sort of 15 minutes, and each game was 5 minutes, first to 7. So very high paced, very team orientated as well. So people are not just running and gunning; they have to play as a team to score, because every point counts in such a short time. And the winner of the day, the whole team, we get vouchers from like JD Sports, or sometimes my wife comes down. She always comes with a gift and then gives it out to all the players as well. So everyone always leaves, well, the winning team always leaves with something at the end of the day. So rather than them coming and paying, they coming for free and then leaving with something, just to kind of show how important they are to us, how important they are to the game as well. And that structure has kind of enabled a lot of the guys when they've gone back to their teams to be able to work better with their teammates, whether it's them doing all the little things like diving for the basketball, rebounding, passing. They don't have to always be the top scorer, but if they can score, then they're taking up that burden as well. So that structure has really worked. And I think that's what's made a lot of people really like our sessions. And a lot of the young guys, it's helped them develop as well, because they can be a part of something that's quite bigger with more experienced players as well. So it's pretty much in line with like that whole like system of how we actually train and coach the kids in the UK as well. It can't be very vague or copy and paste, like you said. You have to kind of create something based on your knowledge and understanding of the people as well.
That's an amazing example of that. And I think too, just you spoke about constraints. So obviously a key part of the CLA is using constraints to shape movement skills. So the nature of the games, the format, that's an example. I think too, David, like free play is so important. And unfortunately, we see free play environments in terms of where kids just self-organize into their own games, or even just participating in a slightly more formalized thing like yours, but something I would still consider in the free play category. Unfortunately, we're seeing all of that being suppressed by working with skills trainers who are not really skills trainers, but teaching techniques. And especially in the US, this has become a huge problem. So I think something that would also be really important for the UK basketball is to explore opportunities to develop more free play opportunities. So have structured practices where ideally kids are practicing in CLA practice environments using the constraint set approach. And then that can be supplemented by really good free play experiences.
Okay, amazing. And let's dive into your book that you're currently developing at the moment, you're about to release. What inspired you to write this book as well? And what's the purpose and the value from it also?
Absolutely. So it's basically my complete manifesto for how this can enormously impact, the basketball world. So let's take a pro team. Could be the London Lions playing in Euro Cup, right? Yeah. It's all these ideas could provide a competitive advantage that simply, no other program in that competition is even coming close to. But then it's not just that. It could apply to a whole federation and the processes and procedures that they create to develop skilled players. It could apply to a volunteer coach who has 2 practices a week under 12s, looking for ideas in terms of how they can use evidence-based approaches. So it's, I've really written the book for everyone, and not just coaches, but people working in every single role, from GMs, scouts to physios, coaches, trainers, everything. So it's very complex, these ideas, and it's not easy to understand. And I haven't gone into a lot on this podcast just because it's difficult and it's not easy to understand this stuff. So the book really helped me present these ideas in a very kind of coherent and better articulated format. So the idea is that it's going to leave people with a really clear understanding as to how they can practically use the theory. But also at the same time, I don't want to skim over the theory, because it's really important to understand it, because the kind of the analogy I give is I'm showing people how to create their own recipes. So I'm not giving them the recipe that must be followed, because like we said, copy and paste doesn't work. And this is unfortunately what we see in basketball, where teams just copy entire playbooks and all their sets are just run on based on what the coaches have used in the past or what they've seen other teams do. Whereas they haven't thought about what principles of play could be most effective for the players we have, the league we're in, and the opponents we're going to play. So it's everything in terms of not just designing principles of play, but working procedures, activities, and practices. So basically, individuals are going to be empowered to really understand the theory and then be able to apply it in their own context, no matter how unique that may be.
And the book, I'm guessing, will be across the span of sports and not just one specific sports as well?
Great
And
question. So
yeah.
I've written it for basketball in mind, and
Mhm.
and the reason why is because obviously basketball is what is, you know, most close to my heart, and it's
Yeah.
the industry I envision working, you know, most of my life in. Fingers crossed.
Mhm.
Of course, I could do this in other sports, but to me, it's not as, it doesn't mean as much because I want to see basketball, you know, become one of the sports that adopts these ideas and benefits from it. So I've
Yes.
written it for basketball in mind, but it's going to be very easily interpreted by coaches from other sports, whether it's lacrosse, football, rugby.
Mhm.
All the ideas can easily be applied in those settings as well.
Okay, amazing. And I did say I was going to come back to this in regards to beyond, because this podcast is called Beyond the Athlete. So we're also not looking at just basketball, but sports in general as well. In regards to the other sports that you said that you currently work in, if you can just outline which sports they are and the impact that you're currently having in them as well, and any transferable skills or techniques that you believe can be applied into the world of basketball also.
Absolutely. So I've done work in football, lacrosse, hockey, American football,
Mhm.
rugby, and I've even done
Nice.
things in law enforcement, looking at how you can
No.
apply these law enforcement. I think too, just a lot of these ideas could affect businesses and organizations develop better processes. Like, you know, a lot of the things I speak about, it's kind of you know, you have to have a progressive environment and
Mm.
an organizational culture which facilitates innovation, new ideas, challenging the status quo. And, you know, a
Yeah.
lot of companies don't necessarily have that because they're very entrenched in the same methods they've always used. It's the exact same as coaching. So, you know,
Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
a lot of different fields, a lot of different people are interested in the things I talk about.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
essentially, I think what, you know, there's a huge advantage obviously to a multi-sports approach, and I think that's probably one
Mhm.
of the things that the American high school system benefits from, and unfortunately
Yes.
that can be negatively eclipsed by things like AAU and just kids
Mm.
playing much, and then, oh, you know, early specialization occurring where kids just do one
Mhm.
sport from a young age. But I think especially for like clubs in the UK, if you know there's ever a situation where a club is able to do 4 or 5 practices a week with a youth team, which would obviously be
Mm.
amazing, you know, doing other things in those sessions. So for instance, a lot of the time when I'm warming players up, whether that's in where what we did in Paris or what I did in
Mhm.
college prep, we do other sports. So we might play football for 10 minutes as a warm up with different constraints
Mhm.
where they can't tackle each other, but they only have 3 seconds on the ball. We might play handball. But like there's loads of different things I've done. And you know, I think the whole idea is from a CLA perspective,
Mm.
we're developing better movers. So athletes who are able to express more varied movement solutions,
Mm.
obviously they're going to be able to do more in basketball.
Yes.
Um, so that's something that really kind of holds true. And I think it's the things I speak about, David, it's not just relevant to basketball in terms of the same problems that encounter the basketball world are encountered by all these other sports. Football can sometimes be more traditional, and that's even more frustrating given that they have resources which far outweigh basketball. So they
Mm.
could easily invest in you know, bringing the right people on board to consult and
Mm.
learn about how to apply these things. Now, of course, there are a lot of the people I've learned from, people like Mark O'Sullivan working in the football world. But again,
Mm.
you know, I'd say traditional approaches are far more dominant than contemporary ones.
Yeah.
So it's, you know, I think it's really interesting for the whole sporting landscape. And one of the things I hope that the book can do is shift
Mhm.
this narrative in all sports and get people really understanding, you know, that there's a completely different worldview out there, and it's just
Yeah.
waiting to be explored and taken advantage of for the good of the players.
Of course, of course. And when are you planning to release your book as
So
well?
I'm just in the final stages now, and I'm
Mhm.
targeting kind of a late summer or fall release, and it's
Oh, amazing. Oh, that's yes, that's it.
through Amazon, so it's going to be available on Amazon on every country.
Okay, okay, amazing. I've got a few more questions to ask. The next one is on the digital side. How impactful is social media right now in terms of spreading a narrative when it comes to sports, especially with what you're currently doing as well in regards to science of coaching. How effective can that be and relatable to young athletes, especially the next generation as well?
Yeah. So I think it's either a positive or negative factor subject to the ideas being shared. So
I think you're frozen.
there we go. I think that's,
Oh yeah.
I'm back.
Yeah.
So I think it's great firstly to see how many kind of coaches embrace social media. But I think the big problem is it's actually led to more traditional coaching because, you know, the rage these days is for skill trainers to post some type of move or technique. And then that's what other coaches see. And they think that's what effective coaching is because it gets loads of likes. So then, you know, others naturally, they want to achieve the same kind of credibility, the same number of followers, get the same number of likes, engagement. So what happens? Well, they start sharing the same or highly similar ideas.
Yeah.
You know, obviously I'm taking a very different approach to social. And I think, you know, it's been good because I think others are starting to do the same who are more in line with these contemporary ideas. So I think it's very important that people have an awareness and a filter when they're on social media and they're not just blindly copying things, but actually thinking, does this make sense? Is there an evidence base that supports these ideas? And I think that's quickly going to lead to people being able to use social more effectively. So for instance, what I see a lot is I might see a drill being used on social media, which I would never use because I don't do things without defense. But then I might take inspiration from it and find a way to add a defender. And now, you know, that exists perfectly within the framework that I use.
So you modify it basically.
Exactly. And I think too, for players, it can be a really good thing because they're becoming aware of different movement solutions that are basically available to them. So I don't like the idea of players seeing a technique and then trying to copy that because, like, you know, I've spoken about that early on, that doesn't make sense because that technique emerged in response to a very unique scenario of a different player trying to solve that problem. So, but what it does do is players seeing different things, they might think about a solution in a way that they haven't thought of before. This is called something known as the affordance landscape. So all that is, an affordance is basically an invitation for action. So an affordance landscape, taking an example of a player finishing, you know, what are all the different opportunities to finish? Maybe they might have to pass out instead. So what social media is great for is basically, you know, presenting these scenarios to players in a way that they might not have considered a problem before.
Okay. Yeah, that's quite interesting as well. And even when I even think about that, not even just coaches that do drills and stuff like that on social media, I'm also looking at the basketball communities as well, like ourselves. You have other communities, eyeball, hoop space, etc. And I feel like they're having quite a lot of impact with young people as well. But then I feel like there's also a ceiling with that as well, that what's next when you're doing so many sessions, you're taking them out to socials, you're building a family, a community, but what's the next step after that in terms of providing value and providing access for a lot of those young players as well? What would you say about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, that's essentially the whole premise. I think any kind of interaction in person, in live with other people is going to have more of a tangible impact than doing things digitally or online. So in coaching, you know, that's why something I say a lot is a lot of coaches now are trying to learn my ideas and it's great. They study them, they read my blogs, they maybe even buy my courses online, but it doesn't mean that they can necessarily apply it because by seeing it real in person, you know, you see things which you can't see on the video, how I interact with the players, how I speak to them, how I run a whole session and keep and move and run at a very fast pace. So I think that's the same in your context. It's like, whenever we can do something in person, I think that can have a far greater impact on
Yes, indeed.
the players and whoever it is we're working with.
Yeah. Okay. So my last few questions would be, the first one would be, do you have a question for me?
Absolutely. I would love to hear about just some of the things I've spoken about today in terms of, transforming the narrative, applying evidence-based ideas. Do you think that there's scope to apply any of these things in your context, or,
100%.
Yeah, love it.
100%, 100%. And that's one of the reasons why I even approached you when I first met you, because one of the guys that was at the trials, I actually played basketball with him when I was at Coventry University. And he's now a coach at Greenhouse, and he told me who you were. I was like, oh, okay. So I researched you. I was trying to find, he couldn't remember your name, so I was trying to find your name, but he remembered the first name, Alex. Ended up finding you, read about you. I was like, oh, I like where his mind and his concept is, like in terms of like how you see basketball, because I'm always someone that likes to be innovative.
Love it.
So like even something like, for example, with Basketball Nation, as much as we're a basketball community, in my mind, I'm already thinking about creating the first basketball sneaker that comes out of the UK. That's not Nike, Adidas. I'm also thinking of developing a video game for the basketball community that comes from UK as well. So I'm thinking about those things, and I'm just trying to think innovation. How do we push the narrative forward rather than just keep doing the same thing over and over again? So I really believe that your transformational skills would be highly important and highly valuable with what we're currently doing as well. Definitely.
That's
100%.
really cool. And that's
Yeah.
it. We're both, in our own unique contexts, we're both disrupting the status quo. And I think that's exactly what it's about. And that's why I think, people in whatever industry in life, if they have disruptive ideas, they're more likely going to get on and priorities for that reason.
Yeah, honestly, you should, the conversation I have with myself sometimes, and even some of my guys as well, I'm like, who says, why is it that basketball has always been 3-on-3, 1-on-1, and 5-on-5 for so many years? Why hasn't no one ever said, oh, let basketball be 7v7 and we just extend the court a bit larger? And then it's more of a team sport now, because there's less space for you to be dribbling and moving around, but now you're actually having to play with your teammates, basically.
It's a great constraint.
Yeah,
I've actually done that in a few practices.
Oh, there you go.
No, just literally, just for how you said, how can players play in less space, and how can they adapt? And it's going to make them more skilled, because they have to figure out new solutions that they've never encountered before. Exactly.
So I'm always thinking about those things. Why does this have to be this way? I'm always questioning it. Why does it have to be this way? Why can't it be this way? It's another human being that made
That
it 5-on-5. So another human being can make it 6-on-6. Another human being can say, no, from outside the 3 could be 4 points, could be 5 points.
Yeah.
So it's like, I
love that. And you're making me think, David. It's like, why does the warm up in basketball always have to be the same? Why does offense and defense have to be the same? Why does the practice plan have to be followed? Why do staff members work so separately? It's like all these things. And that's exactly, I love how you just framed that, because that's basically what I want the book to do. Just make people, instead of being passive consumers of the way things have always been done, ask the question, is there a different way we can do this?
Yes, indeed. Amazing. Thank you for that. Next question would be starts, bench, trade.
Okay.
LeBron, Michael, Kobe.
Oh man. Well, I'm gonna have to start MJ for sure.
Okay.
For sure.
As most people say.
Yeah. I would. Oh man. I really like both Kobe and LeBron in their own ways. I would have to bench Kobe and trade LeBron, unfortunately.
Okay, cool. I think most people have actually said that. But who did I speak to? I spoke to It was Matt from Ballers Life, and I keep telling this to everyone on the podcast, so on the podcast you're always going to hear this. But Matt from Ballers Life, I believe he said that he would trade LeBron because he can get quite a lot of good pieces
See, that's the
to join.
rationale.
Yeah, so that was his
Absolutely.
answer. So I thought that was genius. I was like, okay, cool, that's perfect. That's perfect. Yeah, so yeah, okay, amazing. And next question, final but not least question is, who would you recommend or would like to see on the podcast, on this podcast?
Absolutely. I would say anyone in the UK basketball scene who is challenging the status quo. And,
Okay.
you know, I would love to hear more from people who are doing this, because I think the UK basketball has produced, you know, there's some really talented individuals working in UK basketball. So, you know, whatever field it is, whether it's media, whether it's what they're doing in terms of running a business, coaching, leading young people, like whatever it is, just, you know, people who are doing things differently. I think I'm really always interested in hearing about that.
Have you heard of the skills trainer, Nate Lucas?
I haven't, no.
Okay, I'll send you his Instagram page. I feel like he's someone definitely I want to have one here. I'm actually getting him to train my 13-year-old guy as well. But he's very, how can I put it? He does a lot of like mobility movement training that you apply to when you're actually physically playing. So I know he trains his brother, and he was showing a video of doing lunges with the weights, but it was the way he was doing the lunges, and then the next video was him showing him doing a crossover with the same lunge movement as well, which I thought that was quite impressive.
Awesome.
And his brother is really good as well. So someone like him, I think will be amazing to kind of pick his brain on this podcast. Yeah. So yeah, but Alex, that's all from me. Thank you very much for today.
My pleasure. Enjoyed it.
Yes, me too, me too. And this is not the last time. We're definitely going to speak again. Hopefully get you on some future episodes as well. When the book's out, we can discuss that a bit more as well.
I'd love to.
And yeah, we'll definitely keep in touch.
Great stuff.
When you're in UK, we'll meet up,
stuff.
maybe go out
I'd love
for
to
lunch
see
or
what
something.
you guys do in person, and
exactly.
You know, it would be really cool.
Amazing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and have a good evening, afternoon, or morning, wherever you're watching from. Take care, Boss Nation. Peace out.